Okay,
To make a decision. And you can go,
going
they
to get a
think
couple things set up here, and then we will be off and running. I'll have to. It's been, I don't know, probably 6 years since I've had to do Zoom and run a PowerPoint at the same time. So we'll see. We'll see how I do today.
Okay.
All right. All right. But while we are about to get started here in just a moment, Blaine, do you mind taking prayer requests for us?
Yeah, I got you.
Thank you.
What we got?
Do you have any prayer requests from anyone?
Yeah, I've got a brother that's an ex. Well, he's not a brother. He's affiliated with the military. This brother, he is having some depression issues, and he asked for prayers today. His name is Eddie Cardian.
Eddie, okay.
All right.
I'd ask for prayers for our campus ministry. It is our welcome week. We've had some good events, but our attendance from new folks has been off this year. We think we've figured out why, and so hopefully that will we'll be able to rectify that. We'll be able to get a little better attendance at the next few events that we've got going.
All right.
Any other prayer requests? Paul, you got anything?
Just want to thank God for keeping all of us alive and
Absolutely.
appreciate Him for this privilege to gather like this.
Hmm. Amen.
Mhm.
JD, you got any prayers? Nice to have you with us this week, JD.
Yeah, thank you. I guess one would be uh, in our, I work with the children's home, and we had a unique situation happen a few weeks ago where one of the boys here wanted to go through preaching school. So we got him set up to go to Gibbs, and yesterday was his 18th birthday, which meant that he would leave our program and move full time into the preaching school program. Well, I guess he let temptation get the better of him, and he decided to take off with some old influences and go back to his old way of life. So I guess pray that he can make better decisions. His name is Caden. Pray that he'll make better decisions and, like the prodigal son, come back to himself and recognize people here in his life who really loved and cared about him and wanted him to succeed.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, JD. Appreciate you sharing that with us. And thank you for the work you're doing with the children's home. That is mighty important work. Um, my wife and I, we last year were foster parents, and um, it's tough work. It's tough work. If that's everything, Blaine.
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for this day and all the many things you bless us with. We want to come to you today and ask you to be with Marvin's military brother Eddie for his depression and issues regarding that. We want you to be with us as we continue this ministry class, as well as the technical difficulties and better attendance at the events in the future. We want to thank you for our life and the ability to come to this class and learn more and learn more about your word. And we want to pray that Brother Caden from the preaching school will come to make better decisions in the near future. And dear God, we just want to thank you for this day again and your son Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So, to begin with, I just want to thank all of you for the reading responses and the introduction papers. I've enjoyed getting to read over those. I haven't got to read over all of the ones that I've received, at least in the past couple of days, because we've been, like I said, the campus ministry. It's the first week of the semester, and we are. I mean, we're running from one event to the next, and it's been a very, very busy week. I didn't get home last night until I think probably past 10 o'clock. I think yesterday was a 13-hour day, so it was a full one. It was a good one. Uh, but I'm looking forward to when we get to the unit of this class where I get to like shift gears and talk about that space in between youth ministry and just normal church, I guess, and get to talk about college ministry more in depth. That's the ministry that it's the kind of ministry that got me into ministry in the first place, and it's the kind of ministry that I'm getting to do full time again today, and I love it. It's a very unique mission field. But what did those of you who were able to do the readings, share with the group what was some of the things that stood out to you as being beneficial.
I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right.
Okay. I think the thing that stood out to me is, with my background and everything, and being at Oak Hill here in Rome, the parents seem to want to distance themselves away from their children and let the youth ministers do all the work and their teachers on Sunday morning. I think it's a trend with high school and in general, they seem to want to let the teachers do it. So I found it very beneficial to find someone that has my view that it's the parents' responsibility. These other guys are just a helpmate for us, and that we shouldn't be turning our children over to strangers to raise for us.
For me, one thing that stood out for me was I've never considered the ages of the apostles. So, and how Jesus has really loved working with young men, with children. And it resonates with me that the church should be concerned and intentional about grooming young men. Sometimes we come up with the notion, allow them, when they grow, they'll learn. And we are not intentional about their upbringing, about the lessons taught in their classes. So we just believe that as they grow, they'll learn. And the after effect of that is that we are seeing so many young persons leaving the church. So I think it's high time, as youth ministers, as gospel preachers, we become intentional about it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I would definitely second that. In fact, I liked how the book mentioned that one-eared Mickey Mouse model of youth ministry. I never heard that one, so when he gave the visual, it made me chuckle. But yeah, I definitely just agree with that, with what Paul said, and I appreciate how the book, how it opened up breaking down uh, like God's ultimate plan, and then working to like the family unit being essential in that equation. And so it was eye-opening to consider. I think just here in America, or at least what I experienced, it did seem kind of like, youth ministry is off doing its own thing and parents kind of just drop the kids off and go do whatever. But to see the beauty of like if parents are a part of the winning recipe and working in tandem. Um, so yeah, I definitely agree with it. And um, I do appreciate when the book mentioned like the statistics where what's it called? I think it was that growing younger uh that report.
Growing churches younger or growing younger churches. I forget how exactly it
Yeah,
was.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
the
It's
end of
not like
chapter two.
there you go. Yep, and chapter two. And so just how he was talking about what's it called like just the different criteria and how the churches of Christ, while they were strong, like in two of the criterias, three of them, which I remember was like the key chain surrounding leadership, like that wasn't as strong or that was kind of below the average. And so just little things like that was insightful as well.
Yeah, page 20, it says 37 churches that participated scored below average in keychain, Jesus, and warmth connection. So, meaning that we probably tend to centralize leadership around a singular person, that we tend to look at the gospel as being sin management as opposed to transformation, and we're probably more likely to um, focus on like youth programs that look really cool as opposed to focusing on a community that is warm and welcoming. And that's, I mean, those definitely from when I was reading back over this stuff, and I was taking some notes for class to make sure that I'm, you know, you know, I'm at least as familiar with as you all with this material. Um, that I was thinking about my own ministry, getting to work with college students. Um, the the big difference between the ministry that I get to be part of and your standard youth ministry is uh, how many of us are in ministry uh, part time, like doing bivocational. Anybody? Is anybody full time? Who's full time? Anybody full time? Okay. Um, in previous full time ministries that I've worked in, I have a church office, and I'll go in, I'll sit down, and I'll work on whatever, and I'll maybe make some text messages or some phone calls or some emails, and then along about Wednesday, I'll get to see the youth group, or I'll go to a football game or a baseball game in the evening. And I'll get to see, one family or one kid here and there. With the ministry that I'm in now, I get into my office after I drop my son off at school, and there's at least one student downstairs already. And there will be students downstairs the entire day. Sometimes it'll be one or two, and they're studying or taking a nap or watching TV or playing a video game. Sometimes it'll be, 10 or 12, and they're having a ping pong tournament. And I remember the first week I was in my new job there, and I've got the door closed, and I'm trying to work on my lesson, and I'm not used to working with all this noise. And I hear screaming coming from the next room, just help, help. I mean, you think somebody's getting murdered. And so I just open up the door, look out there. And it's just two of the guys that they're college students that work with me, and they're wrestling on the floor. And uh, one of them knows jujitsu, and I think the other one just knows how to yell loudly. And he was getting just mercilessly tickled. Um, and it's like I just kind of looked at them both, and they kind of froze for a second. And I said, "Y'all all right?" And they nodded, and I said, "Okay, then." I closed my door, went back to Bible class, prepping for class. Um, I get to be with students day in and day out, and having that core community is really important. Whether it's for our youth, they wake up in the morning. Hopefully it's mom and dad or whoever it is they live with are there, and they go off to school, or maybe they're homeschooled. They come home, and there's mom and dad again. Hopefully, um, for our college students, it's not like that. I was reading through this, and it was talking about the how older adolescents, the importance for them finding other family, and so we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But yeah, anyway, just kind of the importance of all these things, whether it's being empathetic to other people and their differences, and um, empathy doesn't mean that you agree. I think sometimes we think that if we're empathizing with what somebody's going through, especially if it's some sort of sin struggle, that there's a danger in that we're taking sin too lightly, and I disagree. Jesus was always very empathic towards people that he worked with, but at the same time, he would tell the adulterous woman, go your way, sin no more. Um, the woman at the well, a similar situation there, where he's talking to her. He doesn't lambast her. He doesn't put her down. He just tells her, hey, the man you're living with isn't your husband, and he kind of just puts that there and just leaves it and lets her deal with that as she would. Taking Jesus' message seriously. Uh, I am an outlier, and so take my opinion with a grain of salt. I think far too often we go too low on our teaching for young people. I think we try to make it too easy, and we don't ask enough of them. And part of that, um, part of that may have to do with the way that we're structuring our classes. Part of that may have to do with other factors like, you know, how big does your youth group have to be before you split into smaller groups? How big does it have to be before you put the middle school over here and the high school over here? Um, and I know some congregation that they'll do sixth grade, they're all by themselves. I think there's good reason for that. And then you have a seventh and eighth grade class, a ninth and 10th grade class, and 11th and 12th grade class. I love that. If you have the numbers for it. But if you're a smaller youth ministry and you've got, six, seven kids, if you're going to have if you're going to do your model that way, well, you might just have one kid in the class. And then they're having a hard time. Like there will be it's less of a Bible class and more of tutoring, but then they're not going to have those peer relationships. And so this is where the integration and the connection becomes really, really important, because if we're going back and we're looking at Acts chapter 2, the church meets daily. Part of that is a function of living in a city where you don't have cars. Um, it's a little bit more difficult for us, but I think it is actually more difficult because we think it is. It's a mental barrier. I'm just thinking about on my way from downtown to my house, living in the suburbs of Chattanooga. I know that I drive by a number of people that I go to church with, and in the mountains on the other side of Chattanooga, there's a Mennonite community, and I had a piece of furniture made by them, and I was talking to them, and it was asking about, well, y'all do have pickup trucks because I've seen you drive them, but everybody around here is either on a bicycle or they're walking or they're on a mule, or what's up with that? And he explained, when we're in our community, we won't use a motorized vehicle because if we do, we get comfortable living farther apart and we get comfortable going faster. And then we don't notice when our neighbor is out in their yard. We don't notice when our neighbor's shutters need painting. We don't notice when their vegetable garden needs weeding, or going slow gives them the ability to notice those kinds of things. And so, I guess as a side point, there is a benefit in ministry with going slow. So much of our culture pushes us to go faster and faster and faster, but to relationships, strong relationships don't happen quickly. If you think of Jesus' parable of the soils, one of them, man, it springs up quick, buddy. And then what happens to it? Noon rolls around, it's dead. There is a benefit to the slow and the intentional. Anyway, but yeah, that whole list on page 20, I could go through it one by one, but I trust the fact that y'all have read that, and it really is beneficial. Sorry, others, anybody else who wants to chime in with benefits?
I second your opinion on the whole we make teaching the young people too easy. We've had the same deal at Piedmont Road where we're not teaching them in depth enough, and then they're wanting to come back to the younger classes, say third and fourth and fifth, and we've had to split it too. But that's one of the biggest things that I second Paul on, or even third Paul, I guess, because Jesus taught the young people a lot and enough to go out and teach other people. And so we really just need to be doing that anyway.
Yeah, the one of the big takeaways for me is that you can teach deep without being complicated. And if you do run into stuff that is complicated, it just needs to be a conversation, and then okay, I'll say something. That, I want you to explain that back to me. Use prompt them to actively listen. Last night we had a great Bible class with the college students, and we were talking about the value of friendship. And I asked them, I said, what's the purpose of friendship? Like, why sell friendship to me? And they just like look at me like I got two heads, and I said, one of them said, "Do you want me to sell you friendship?" I said, "Yeah, sell me on the idea. Tell me why it's important." And so he sits there and we kind of, we got a classroom of about, I don't know, 30 or so last night. And so the larger the classroom, it diffuses the responsibility to respond and also increases the social anxiety to respond. So you just kind of have to start calling on people if your class is being quiet. Blaine, what do you think? And Paul, what do you think? And so you put them on the spot, and they'll be able to respond. Eventually, enough people have spoken that people who have ideas will then begin to speak. But I had one of my young men. He says, well, we use friendships as leverage for evangelizing. And I said, so friendship is a tool to get people to come to church. And he was like, well, yeah, kind of. And I was like, what do y'all think about that? And I'm like watching some people kind of like mull it over. And I said, I think that the goal of friendship is, or the purpose of friendship is it gives us a place to love. What was it? Chapter 1, when Kirk is talking about the theology of youth ministry, talked about how we're made in God's image. We're God's image bearers. God is love. Therefore, we are made for relationship, and loving beings seek someone to love. And so that's the goal of friendship is to is to have someone to show that love to. And I told my students, I said, look, love's the only thing that you can give away and have more of. And so, we were talking about that. And so like telling him like I agree with the end of his thinking, that there should be a connection between, if I'm a friend of somebody and I love them, I want to connect them to Jesus. But it's not a bait and switch where I'm gonna befriend this person, and that way I can steer them in. It's like, no, you befriend a person because you love them, and you share Jesus with them because you love them. They're both two things that come from the same place. You're not moving through something as a leverage point, trying to use people. Um, and so I think, like, with our youth and with our college students, um, the more you can give them the opportunity to express how they're thinking about things, you're going to be able to explore some of those little distortions and get deeper into the text, get deeper into God's word. I remember having a young man. We were talking about the life and ministry of Jesus, and he referenced something that, according to him, his mother Mary said to him. And uh, I think he even said, "Isn't it in the Gospel of John that Mary asked Jesus, if not now, when?" And it's like, okay, the wedding of Cana is in John, but Mary never says that. Anybody know where he got that from? Have you seen the TV show The Chosen? He had been watching The Chosen, and he had mistaken something that Mary says in one of the episodes as something that was actually in the Bible. And so, giving your students an opportunity to speak up, you can kind of see what they understand, what they maybe are a little bit out of alignment on, and then you can expose like massive gaps in the understanding. And then that's where you can kind of go in and build build those bridges. And a big thing. Well, I'll get into this later. I haven't even gotten to the PowerPoint yet. Was there anything in these two chapters that anybody thought like, I don't know about that? Anything that anybody took issue with?
Well, not really issue, but I just wanted to say something that I mean, reading it, I kind of like realized that parents do have a major influence in their kids' spiritual life, and one thing that I wish there was like more practical example of how the church and the parents, could put together to help them better. Because
Mm,
as right now I am not, but from previous churches, I used to be like the youth president, and I used to minister the youth. So I kind of see that when things are not really good at home, it does affect them in church, and and then sometimes they don't take it too seriously. They just come to church, and I just wish that the parents understand that just like one of you guys was saying earlier, just throwing them to church or send them to church is just not it. There is more to it, because we don't want them just to do things. I mean, just to be there. You want them to be connected or understand exactly who God is, or what they're getting themselves into. Because I don't find it to be a light work, or because they're young, they just do things to do things. But I feel it's very dangerous for them to get into ministry, or to be a part of the choir or whatever they're part in, if they don't really understand what they're doing it for. Because I'm sorry about that, they might just be doing it, but there is good result coming out of that. But at the same time, Satan is not happy when he see the young kids doing things. And then sometimes I feel like they just being exposed without the proper precautions or the proper covering. I don't know if
mhm.
you get what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
I
say.
get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a challenge to like how does the church partner with families in a way to get the families to actually minister at home? That's something that I have run into in the past. I remember I was talking to one of the mothers and great family, awesome people, um, just really kind of like I don't know, just felt like they were on top of the whole picture of parenthood. And I was saying something about the importance of home Bible studies, and the mother goes, "Yeah, we don't do that." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I get, people are busy." And she goes, "No, I'm not doing that." And I was like, "Why?" And she goes, "I send my kids to a private Christian school, and we have you." And it was like I was pretty stunned by that, and I was like, "Okay, so what do you?" Um, honestly, it was something that I wasn't able to say anything in the moment. I was just kind of stunned, but I had since had the relationship with her and her husband that was able to kind of come back to that and discuss that more. And she was also the kind of person that like she's very blunt, she's very forward, and sometimes she oversimplifies her views on things in order to be direct. Um, and so we talked more about it, and I talked more about what a family devotional looks like, and it was like her. I think her response was, "Oh, is that all that is?" And once she understood that it's like, "Oh, all we do is like after dinner before we all run off to our own rooms and look at our phones, I get the kids to sit down in the living room and we just read a portion of scripture. Maybe it's a chapter, maybe it's just a piece of a chapter, and I like the what's called the Discovery Bible Study method. I use this for the college group. I've used it in mission work. I've used it for family ministry. I've used it pretty much in every capacity of ministry I've ever done. You read a passage of scripture, you ask them, what does this teach me about God? What does this teach me about people? What does this teach me about obedience? This week, I will. Who can I share this with? If you can answer those 5 questions, you can do it with any passage of scripture out there. It will help you with theology. It will help you understand people better. It will help you better apply scripture and understand what to do with it. It will uh, you'll make a specific goal as to how to then apply it in your own life, and it will teach you how to evangelize because you're trying to share it with people. And so then if you're just doing, even if it's just really little things, that's the beauty of people setting their own goals, is they're able to set it at the level that they're comfortable of doing. There's big, my master's practicum was in spiritual formation and motivation. How do we motivate people to just grow closer to God? There is big evidence in one, having somebody who is like, you can see them do it. If you have um, an exemplar, and it needs to be somebody that you can look at and you can kind of see yourself in. Sometimes if you're a person who wears the title of minister, well, people think, well, you're not like me. Um, they'll go to you and they'll trust you with things because you're the minister, but they'll also kind of keep you at a distance because you're minister. So it cuts both ways. Um, but if you have somebody in the church who's not a minister and is doing something, you can use them as the example of like, what does this look like? And that can be a kid, that can be a parent, that can be anybody. We had a lady in church who had tremendous health issues for many years, and she was faithful in attending church. She was, faithful in trying to evangelize people. She worked really hard. She was always the person that if you were sick or if you had just had a baby or whatever, she's going to bring you food. She's all the time doing stuff for other people. Um, my wife, she's in the medical field. I was asking her, like, what's her condition? And she goes, oh, it's scleroderma. It's the only, she said it's the only condition that she's heard actual doctors say, if I ever get that, just kill me because it's so painful. And this woman, you'd never know she was in pain. It is a condition that causes all of your tissues to harden and makes your joints hard to move and even things like your arteries, your tongue, your eyes begin to dry out. It's a horrible condition. And she lived with it for over a decade when they gave her 3 years at most. And she never complained. She never looked at it as like, people ought to be doing more for me. For her, it was, I'm thankful that I get to still see my children every day. I'm thankful that I get to, love my family. I'm thankful that I'm still able to go to church, even if I hurt. I'm thankful that I'm still able to cook, even if I can't eat what I cook. Always an example of gratitude, always an example of love to others. Legitimately, the last thing this woman did before going to heaven is her nurse was coming in and she was having a Bible study with her. Powerful stuff. But going back to your original comment, parents having, they have this tremendous impact on kids, and so how do we better equip? So I think, the family devotionals is a massive tool, especially if you can show just how easy it is to do this. And if the kids are able to kind of set their own goal, like you read the story of the Good Samaritan. You might have one child that'll say like, I'll share, I'll take an extra dessert for lunch tomorrow so I can share it with a kid that doesn't have something. And then you might have another one that says, I'm going to invite this kid from another table that nobody talks to my table. Things like that. So the kids at whatever level they're at and the parents at whatever level they're at, if you go and you can get that, what is essentially an easy win, it motivates you to do that much more. If you're setting pie in the sky goals and we often say, if you shoot for the moon and you miss, you land among the stars. The truth is if you shoot for the moon and you miss, you end up dying cold and alone in space. So having like little achievable goals and you just build on those every day, that's the trick. So that's a really big one with families, is just giving them the easy in and letting them feel like they win and then celebrating with them. That's huge stuff. Any other things I wish they'd gone into more detail, or I wish there was more on this, that, or the other? Is there anything you wish the book had said, or any
Well,
issues you had? We
so
can
be-
we can talk about those.
before we get to that, could you restate, Harrison? What were those 5 questions that you used for the
Oh,
discovery study? I know you
yeah,
said this.
yeah. It's what does this tell me about God? What does this tell me about people? What does this tell me about obedience? And you can actually play with that one a little bit. You can change it to obedience. You can change it to evangelism, but
Mm,
obedience always works.
okay.
This week I will dot dot dot. That's where you make your goal, and then who can I share this with this week? And if families just do that, if they did it, if they just read the Bible and just said this stood out to me, or ask a question, like either give something that they think is helpful or ask a question. If you just do those two things, that's a really good Bible study. And that's something that, like, once you're, what my wife and I do, our son is 4. Since we brought him home from the hospital, before he could process language, we read the Bible to him every single night. And it's beginner's Bible, lots of pictures, not a lot of words. And as he's gotten older, we've gotten kind of, a more advanced version. I think we're on our third Bible. And for a long time, I thought the only thing this boy cares about is David and Goliath and Jonah and the whale. That's the only stories he cares about. And we were doing something the other day. We were playing magnet tiles. That's what it was. His magnet tiles, and he's stacking them up. He's building things. And he goes, I'm building an altar, Dad. And I was like, oh, you're building an altar, really? And he goes, yeah. Bam! And he just smashes it. And he goes, I'm Gideon. And that is my son's name. And I was like, what? And he goes, Gideon, when he broke that altar down, and everyone got real mad. And it's like, yeah, that is the beginning of the Gideon story. That's what they call him, Jerubbaal. And it was just like, goodness gracious, I didn't know that had lodged in there. I was shocked. Um, and it's just one of those things that you build on it incremental over time, and it makes a difference. There's nothing quite like consistency. It is a powerful tool. Um, yeah. Any other questions or insights into the reading? If not, I want to try to share my screen. Let's see if this works. Yeah, that is not the button I need. Dalen, you seem to be the one to ask about how to do stuff on Zoom. How do I share my screen? I got a PowerPoint here. Is that under whiteboards?
All right. So are you using the app or you
I'm on the app. Yes, I've
okay, so you should see an icon that's next to the more button with 3 dots and it says share. So
oh, share. Yeah, yeah. If
yeah, that's a little
Thank you,
share.
Dalen. Thank you.
No problem.
I've earned this gray hair in my beard. I'm an old man. Uh, okay. Share settings. Okay. Share settings or just oh well, there we go. Um,
It'd be just like share screen.
okay. And I will use okay.
So when you press the share button, what came up?
Oh, it's having me do things through the like
Oh,
get permissions and all that other stuff. It is not doing it right now, so I will do it the old-fashioned way. All right. Oh, and I've got my screen blurred. I'm gonna have to I'll just kind of go back and forth between showing what's on the screen and then other stuff. So
Now, just curious, there's an iPhone 4 that appeared. Is that yours by chance?
It's me. It's me,
Oh,
guys. I just switched to my phone because I have to run and pick up my son from Ben real quick.
oh, gotcha. No worries.
All right.
okay, so we're talking about like what is youth ministry, and really we're talking about if we're talking about youth ministry. Oh, oh man, I want to make y'all motion sick if I.
So, just curious, Harrison, what you're currently using for Zoom, I'm guessing is your
Mhm.
phone.
And no, I'm using my laptop, but it's telling me if I would have to like quit Zoom and restart the whole thing in order for it to work right
Huh.
now. Yeah, I
Interesting.
think it's just because I haven't given it the permissions before,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I think I think we've reduced our technical difficulties by a serious factor this week, but still occurring. I tell you, by the time we get to week 14, we'll be in really good shape. Um, all right, let's see if I can.
Now, one other possible thing is if you wanted to maybe email us the presentation, if that helps any.
Yeah, I can do that. That would be a smart person would do that. Thank you, Damon.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
let me we'll take a break here in a little bit, and I'll do that over our break, and that way we can figure that out. So, okay, what is youth? Can y'all? How would you define the term youth?
I'd say I would not, well, I think youth is anything really before college. So like K through 12 is what crosses my mind as youth.
Mm, okay, so K through 12.
Yeah.
All right.
In fact, I'll put the caveat of youth is, well, I should care with this. More than likely, like living out on their own. Like I know some people still live
Mm,
with their parents, so no slight whatsoever, but just assuming like, okay, you graduate high school, typically you go off to college, or you're out on your own if you decide not to go to college. So that's kind of the thought process I have.
yeah, yeah, okay. That makes sense. Like um you're there is a let's see, a study. It was a sociological study. I can't remember what it was when it was from. I'd have to look it up. But that people in America are generally regarded as not quite an adult until age 30. And it's like, whoa. It's about, it's like that's, sorry, Blaine, but it's
Yeah,
one of those
going
things
on
where it's like,
2 years.
and it is, that's the other thing is like when in a culture that doesn't have rites of passage, that is a challenge, to say like, are you or are you not? And I think maybe in our culture, it's do you have a mortgage? Uh, that's the determining factor.
Yeah.
But yeah, other definitions of youth because there's certainly more than one.
I would say, as a general term, it would be somebody who is being ministered to rather than ministering other people. So,
Hmm.
like a 6-year-old isn't ministering anybody most of the time. I mean, obviously at school, but
Yeah, they might
in
they might
general.
be evangelizing on the playground.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, I had a friend in third grade. He and I basically took turns every day trying to evangelize the other one. One Church of Christ, one Baptist. So we're still friends though. Um, but yeah, so we uh, you know generally one who is ministering versus ministering to. If you were to have a youth program, where would you set the parameters? This is for everybody, not just you, Blaine.
I think we got to be careful with age because there are people out there that maybe need to be in a youth program that are a little older, 30 is
Yeah,
not out of
they
the question.
yeah they got some stuff they
So,
need to learn.
Maybe
Yeah.
people with
right,
disabilities.
right. That,
Hmm.
that, I don't really know about I had a very weak youth ministry when I was growing up, and with that being said, I think it hurt my maturity level because there was things I didn't really understand. And then when you go to adult classes and they're starting to explain, and at that point they expect you to know about Gideon, right, already. But some of us don't because we didn't have that exposure at an early age, and so
Yeah, this is
maybe not a youth program, but definitely a youth minded program
yeah,
would
there
have
is
been.
there's definitely room for how are youth ministries, how are young professional ministries, how's the children's ministry, how's the the adult class, how are these curriculums working together to make sure that kids are learning all the things they need to learn. A friend of mine, Chad Landman, he is the education minister at the Graymere Church of Christ. He has an education program that his congregation runs that from cradle roll until I want to say high school, if they go to church there their entire life, they will go through the whole Bible, I believe 3 or 4 times. And it's when the kids are very young, it's very simple stories, very basic. And then by the time they're out of their, threes and fours class or whatever it is, they get into that, early elementary school age, kindergarten through probably third grade, I believe. They're going to go through the whole thing again, but now it's going to be more specific. It's going to build on those details. It's going to have just more content. By the time they get into upper elementary school, into middle school, that upper elementary to middle school age group, they're going to hit it again, and they'll cycle through it again. By the time they get into high school, they'll go through it again, and by this time they're they might still hit stories like Adam and Eve and the flood and all those sorts of things, but they're also dealing with much deeper issues within those stories. The story is familiar, but every time you go through it, you kind of realize like, oh, Noah's Ark isn't just about putting all the animals on the boat. There people die. This is about the seriousness of sin. You get to the King David stories, and it's not just David and Goliath and stuff like that, but it's the stories of Amnon and Tamar, and you're having to deal with things like um, you know sexual abuse and all the issues that kind of come down the line in that story. And so they get to go through more of those kinds of stories. So by the time they hit college, they have a pretty good biblical foundation of knowing like what's been going on there. A couple of years ago, the congregation where I minister at now asked me to come up with for our middle and high school group what we would what we do for a curriculum for them. And I wanted to make sure that in the time they're in the youth group, they will have done a study on every single book of the Bible over the course of 4 years. And they would also hit, I think annually, they would have at least one unit, one quarter on service and one quarter on evangelism. They would have rotating quarters on various topics. Hopefully that would tie into the books that they're already studying. But if a kid stayed with our congregation through middle school and high school, my goal was for them to get through the whole Bible about 1.5 times. I would like for it to be two, but I needed a couple more years to tackle on to make it really work. But having a curriculum plan in place for a congregation is a really good way to make sure that all that stuff's working together. And if you've got young adults or parents, and maybe they're not mature enough to teach, one of the things that I have found to be hugely, hugely helpful is, use your own wisdom and discretion, but maybe they can sit in on some Bible classes for a quarter as a helper. And their job is just to pass out papers or, help kids cut with scissors or, manage the nonsense behavior of your middle schoolers or just sit there and be relatable to the high schoolers. Whatever it is that the kids are needing at those developmental levels, you bring in this person at another level. they're getting to benefit from the Bible class, but they're also getting to serve. And then, if somebody's a new believer, or this is kind of outside of the, youth ministry thing, but having a back to basics class, I think every congregation should do a back to basics class at least every couple of years, just for one quarter, hit basic narratives, basic biblical teachings, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we all understand, that we've got it. It doesn't need to be an all the time thing, but every few years we do well to kind of hit those fundamentals. Anyway, so oftentimes when we talk about youth, certainly there is, whether you want to make the cutoff at 18 or 22 or 30 or whatever, that there's a young person. We might think of it in terms of, you got children, you've got adolescents, and you've got young adults. Which young adult is a tricky topic all to its own, because you never want to be able to tell somebody, hey, you're not a young adult anymore, old person, get out of here. I'm a big fan of, like, have another name for that. Or young professional. It's like, well, I'm just a professional now. I'm not a young professional. But having children's, youth, young adult, or college, or whatever that group is going to be for your congregation, depending on their needs. Having a well-developed children's ministry, you've got a lot of different different developmental milestones to look out for. Everything from being able to feed themselves, little bites of food, being able to follow the hand motions of little songs, all of those things that small children are doing, all the way up to being able to write, being able to read, being able to express yourself in a coherent way. All those things those kids learn through that period into middle school. The big question for most youth ministers is, what do I do with a sixth grader? Because sixth graders, at least in my part of the country, and you all feel free to speak to your experience here. Sixth graders are included with middle school, which is your seventh and eighth graders. And so that would be, you might get an 11-year-old every now and then, but typically it's going to be like your 12-year-olds are going to be in that sixth grade class. You might have a few 13-year-olds, but you're going to have mostly 12-year-olds. Thing is about a 12-year-old is they're still kind of in that big kid area. If you've ever spent much time around youth, particularly sixth graders and early sixth graders, they are very much on that cusp of, sort of just being a kid. They don't quite have the social anxieties. They don't have the moodiness. They don't have the same concerns as your other middle schoolers and high schoolers will have. A lot of it has to do with the social and neurological and physical development. It hasn't started kicking in for most of those kids yet. It doesn't start really kicking in for most kids until about seventh grade. And that's why, if you're looking at just the gap socially, intellectually, just who they are as a person, you can look at your juniors and seniors, and they're kind of in the same boat. Your sophomores and freshmen are pretty close. Seventh and eighth graders are pretty close. But man, sixth graders, especially at the beginning of the school year, they're a world apart. They feel very different. And you get to see a lot of change with them over the course of the year. So, if you ever have a program that's big enough that you can put sixth graders off on their own, that's a really smart move. But I know that a lot of congregations can't do that. I've never been with a congregation that has a big enough youth program to really do that effectively. But I've been in ones where you can split middle and high. I've been in ones where you have to lump them together. And the concerns are different there. And so if whether you have them split or you have them lumped, you want to look at your group and always just be mindful of who you're teaching to here. Some of these kids are going to be brand new to Christ. Some of these are going to have like nothing. They're going to have no foundation. Some of them, their mom and daddies have been doing these nightly devotionals since they were very, very little, and they know all the answers. And so when you're teaching, your class needs to be a little bit like a song. It needs a register. It needs to move up and down. And so you've got some basic stuff, and then you want to be able to level up and teach them harder stuff. And then you want to be able to level up again and like really kind of hit them with some hard stuff. If you can level your class that way, over the course of 35, 40 minutes, you have the ability to hit everybody in that room with at least something. A lot of the conventional wisdom is to teach to the lowest level in the room. The problem that I have had with that is when you teach to the lowest level in the room, anybody above that level is either desperately bored or they don't feel like the Bible has anything to offer them anymore. They begin to feel before they graduate high school, they begin to feel like they've outgrown their faith. And then we send them off to college. And that's a recipe for disaster. And so I like to be able to like hit things at different levels in a youth class. And it takes some deliberate planning. It takes some experimentation. I certainly haven't always done it perfectly, but it's something that the more you work on it, just trying to figure out, get to know your kids, know what's going to hit them. And there's always going to be some things that kind of hit across the group is a lot of the social conflicts and social struggles. Those are going to hit different, but if you're talking about dating, man, it's going to be all over the map. Sixth graders are going to be scared to talk to the opposite sex, and your 11th to 12th graders, it's like, I wish you would stop talking to the opposite sex, leave them alone, and so, or just learn how to do it in the appropriate way. Anyway, so that's talking about youth. Okay, so Kirk said something in the first chapter, second chapter. I forget exactly when it was, but it was to the effect that he makes a point about the average life expectancy of people in the ancient world, and I want to give a little bit of nuance because Kirk, I'm sure he knows this, but he didn't have the space in his chapter to include this massive caveat. When we say that most people in the ancient world lived to 35, like we're having to deal with how math kind of messes this up for us. What people in the ancient world were dealing with were massive rates of infant mortality. Majority of people born did not make it to age 5. If the majority of people living to age, the majority of people who die are under the age of 5, what's that going to do to your average age? It's going to drag it way down. And so if you look at the actual numbers, it's like if you break it down to, if you make it to age 5, it's not, the average life expectancy isn't 35. It's more like 40, 45, 50, kind of in that age range. If they can make it all the way to age 20, your life expectancy is 60, 70, even upwards of 80 years old. And I think it's important to note that because, especially to Kirk's point about the age of the apostles, it's a lot of people will say, well, it's impossible that John would have lived to 80, 90 years. That's 2 lifetimes in that point. It's like, no, it isn't. We know John probably made it to age 20 because he lived to be an apostle. If he lived that long, there's a pretty good chance he got to make it well beyond that. And there's plenty of early Christian history that points to the fact that he did. And so just kind of know that when you see those numbers kind of thrown out there, it's not like everybody running around the ancient world is, looking at somebody like me and going, man, how's he not dead yet? They have, they had, like, if you made it past 20, your life expectancy was pretty well in the ballpark of our say. The reason why our average life expectancy has changed so much in the modern age, especially over the last 100, 120 years, is because of penicillin, other antibiotics, some vaccines, and, like, honestly, aspirin. The ability to control for viruses, infection, and to lower fever has done more to improve life expectancy than probably, that and clean water have done more than anything else. If you ever have a chance to get into a time machine, don't. You would not survive the air or the water. Anyway, so talk about what youth is. What is family? What do we call family?
Group of people that are related to each other in some way.
Okay. Yeah, generally we think of it in terms of a biological relation. Anybody have any fictive kin? Y'all know what fictive kin is? Yeah,
Yes.
actually, yeah, you were saying, Marvin, Eddie, your brother. Is there a biological relation there?
No, there's no
Yeah,
relation at all.
yeah. Not maybe until all the way back to Noah, at least. Um, you have to go back pretty far, but he's your brother. My wife and I, when we were doing foster care, one of the things they ask the families is well, do you have a kinship placement for your child? Do you have somebody that you would trust to take care of your kid? Do you have your parent, sister, brother, cousin, whatever? And what sometimes doesn't get communicated is kinship could also just be, do you have a good friend? Do you have somebody at church? Do you have anybody in your life that you would trust to take care of your kid? And the sad fact is a lot of people would say no. Um, and so when we're thinking about family, especially for the congregation, for the the household, the idea of family has actually changed a lot over the past, really over the past 200 years. So no way you're going to be able to read this. This will be in the I'll send this out here in a little bit. I'm going to read some of this. It says defining who family is important, and this comes from Dana R. Garland in a textbook. She's the editor, called "Family Ministry: A Comprehensive Guide." It was published in 2012. There's a section called "Fighting About Family." It says being identified as family brings societal rights and expectations, such as if you've ever been to the ICU. ICUs often limit visitors to "quote unquote" immediate family. They're talking about biological, atomic family. Zoning laws may limit who can reside together in a single family dwelling. Tax codes give breaks to persons recognized as family. And so society holds people who are family responsible for one another legally and economically. The argument over who is allowed to call themselves family is not therefore an idle one. Definitions have the power to shape that which they simply appear to be defining. She goes on to say later in the chapter that the sociological term nuclear family, that's a new term in none of the European languages from the 1800s back. None of them had a specific term for the household family or the nuclear family, as we might think of it as. They just didn't have that term. It was just family. But nuclear family tends to describe a married heterosexual couple and their children. But if you go back to the Roman world in the Bible times, the Roma Familia referred to the entire household. And if you were a wealthy Roman, that could be hundreds of persons, children, servants, slaves, even your livestock counts as part of the Roma Familia in the way they defined things. All the way going back to the Romans, people talk about their dogs being family. I've got two dogs. The Hebrew household similarly ranged between 50 to 100 people and was the primary place of economic production. The only limit to the size of the household was the ability of the household to support its members. And so in the Hebrew version, it's largely biological. The Roman version, you've got it's pretty much whoever's in the house. If you're talking about an extended family network, it would be, if we're talking about like a Roman family, my dad would be the head of the household. He's the oldest male in our family, and then it would be me, and then it'd kind of go down from there. I've got a sister. She would not be part of my family anymore because she's married. She would be somebody else's family. So long, sis. My wife, she would no longer be part of her parents' family. She would be part of my family. And so when we're thinking of it, we think of more of an interwoven web of connections where all these in-laws and cousins and everything else is included. Um, but these would be, somewhat different. So like my father, he has a couple of brothers, and so the larger familia would also be across his brothers. If my grandfather were still living, it would definitely all be part of the same massive family structure. So a little bit of history there. Little case study here for the Industrial Revolution and how it affects the American family. Prior to the American Revolution, or not, sorry, not American, Industrial Revolution. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, most American families subsisted off of farming. Agriculture was it was required. It required every member of the household to work from home. Everybody had to work together to produce this stuff. And so as a result, you end up having large family, you have what's referred to as family land. And everybody's living, together on that. You're going to have, aunts, uncles, cousins. They're all going to be working together to bring in the harvest. They're all going to be working together to raise the kids. Kids are going to be raised alongside, siblings and cousins. Maybe there's a one-room schoolhouse they'll go off to and learn, or maybe grandma's going to teach them what they need to learn, but they're going to spend time out in the field. I know my great grandfather, he got pulled out of school when he was in third grade so he could pick corn. That's about all the formal schooling he got. And so those kinds of, that kind of family network is very, very different than what happens after the American Revolution. Sorry, Industrial Revolution. I keep saying American. The Industrial Revolution, what it ends up doing is it moves work outside the home. The home was no longer the center place for production. If you were a blacksmith or a farmer or a butcher or whatever, you used to work out of your home, and now you don't. A lot of men were moving off to cities in order to seek, better pay, better jobs. And what ends up happening is because the city is so expensive, they moved into this job, and now they're having to work, and then their wives had to go to work. And in many cases, I've got a photo here, their children had to go to work too. You see that little boy there, he's barefoot on a spinning machine. These things, they look nice, but they were terribly dangerous and would, pull kids in and kill them, maim them. Very, very dangerous machines. What ends up happening is, as a result of this, we get something called the family wage that was pushed for, and men become what's called the primary breadwinner. The husband, the head of the household, the husband, he would go off to work. The wife was allowed to become the homemaker, and then children were oftentimes moved into public schooling. Early public schooling was designed around the qualities and things that would make for a good factory worker. So it was all kind of one big system. And so post World War II, a lot of those things get kind of copied and pasted, but then updated to match the post-war times. But then what happens since the 1980s is that there's been, unfortunately, some degree of wage stagnation that's not been able to keep up with inflation. And so that's driven more and more women into, they've been encouraged to work, but there's also an economic incentive that if you want to own a home, you either got to make big money from one person, or you're going to have two incomes in a lot of places. Yeah, Marvin. Do you have
Oh
something?
no, I'm sorry.
Okay. And so then what happens there is often is the case, you have young children, you're having to find daycare, and so the network that used to be on the family land has now shifted to be dispersed among a lot of those same jobs done by non-family members, and so that has caused the way that Americans think about family to shift. Anybody recognize any of these properties? Well, it's zooming in. Don't zoom in. Oh, this thing's doing the. Okay, so it is set to do this auto zoom thing, and it's trying to find faces, and so it's not letting me hold it still. I've got 6 photos up here, and it's the TV show Friends, the most recent installment of Star Wars Mandalorian, The Office, The X-Men, 80s show Cheers, and a comic book of Little Orphan Annie. Anybody know what those things have in common?
Family.
Family.
These are all stories about what's referred to as found family. Everything from Friends to The Mandalorian, Little Orphan Annie. These are all family stories, but they are looking at kind of what family looks like within the lens of like what's that family support network look like, when humanity has been removed from that traditional, that at least in our country, that kind of that traditional model. So I guess the last part, what does it mean to be involved? What does involvement mean?
To be a part of something.
Yeah, to be part. Okay. I like that. How do we measure that? Like, when do we say, yeah, this guy at church, he's involved? Is it enough to say that he's on the roll, that he shows up to church regularly? At what point do we say somebody is an involved member?
I would
think
say, go ahead.
Go ahead, Blaine.
Okay, I would say somebody who's doing more than just showing up to church, like participating in worship or teaching the children or just a regular class.
Okay. Yeah, they've taken on a role. Marvin, what were you going to say?
Active participants.
Oh yeah, JD, active participants. Yeah, active participation. Yeah.
And that's basically what I was going to say, when they go out of their way to, I think, welcome other people in to the family.
Yeah, they're welcoming people in. They're participating in stuff. They are, looking for stuff to do. In my campus ministry, I sit down with my leaders every year. We'll flip this around again. Let me get my cursor back over here. Okay. So I do a thing with my student team that I work with every year, and if I can get, I wish I had a blackboard. That would be real handy right about now. This is I guess you'd call it a 3-tier model of a ministry. It's kind of a bullseye. Don't you blur that crazy thing. All right, there we go. Let's see, there we go. You've got this bullseye. In here, you've got A group, B group, C group, A, B, C, D. Oftentimes, your smallest group in the church, you'll hear people talk about, and this is with any organization that what is it? 10% do 90% of the work or whatever, 20% do 80% of the work or whatever it is. And there is a level of truth to that, where you have typically a smaller group of people that are in the leadership and service roles within a congregation, within an organization. I want you to think about your congregation where you minister, the people that are like the most involved, that are the most like, they know what's going on. They're the ones that are planning stuff. They're the ones that are facilitating things. Who are they friends with?
The elders and the minister usually.
Yeah, they're typically friends of the elders and the minister, and the elders minister, they're pretty involved. The thing is, your A circle, most of their friends are inside the A circle, and it's not always because they're really cliquish and they want to keep people out and they want to be in control. That's typically not the case. Typically, what the case is that you have a group that you have people that are in that position of power. They spend time around each other. They're making those decisions together, and they're thinking, well, who can I get to help me with this? And so they know some people, and so they ask those people, and the more those people say yes, the more it becomes easy to ask them to do things. Now you've got a B group. B group is a very important group. A group and B group tend to be pretty close. There's some fluidity across these barriers, because B group, they will do anything you ask them to do. These are people that you can go to. You can count on them. You know they're going to be there. Like you expect them to be at church. You know that if I ask them to teach a class, or bring a casserole on Sunday, or take these muffins to this family that just had a baby, yeah, absolutely, would love to. Now they might not have ideas about like, hey, can we do this? And I want to plan this, and I want to be in charge of that. They might not be there, but they'll do anything you ask them to do. A group and B group tend to be pretty close. B group, however, is also close to C group. C group, they're probably going to be pretty regular with their attendance. Maybe they'll be in and out. Maybe they're not there all the time, but you are not surprised to see them. You don't think of them as a guest. You think of them as part of the congregation. It's a bigger group typically. And the C group, sometimes if you're in the A group, it's really hard to get them to do stuff. If you want to ask them to do stuff, I can't, kids got ball game. I can't, I'm working a late shift. I'm not really comfortable with that. I can't really teach. And they'll have reasons why they can't, they're uncomfortable doing what you're asking them to do. Some of it, very legitimate. Some of it, people on the inside are going to think like, that's not a real excuse, man. Come on, like get it together. And that's why the A group and the C group have conflict. The C group thinks A group doesn't understand me. And the A group thinks the C group isn't committed enough. You know who can get the C group to do stuff more often?
The B group.
B group. B group gets them. B group is, they're not a clique. They look at the B group and they think, yeah, they're more like me than the A group is. They get things. And so if B group goes to C group, say, hey, can you help me with something? They have the relational rapport typically, and they tend to see them as being more approachable, and they're typically much better at getting people involved who are in that C group area. And again, I don't want to make it sound like your A group is your super spiritual and your C group is your lukewarm Christians. That's not the case. Sometimes you can have very, very spiritual people in the C group. Their life is crazy right now. They've got, an aging parent that's in and out of the hospital, and they've got young kids, and they've got, a brother that's just, causing problems for the whole family, and they're trying to sell their house, and their dog is sick, and, their company is being restructured, and it's like they've met their bandwidth and they just can't. And sometimes people will operate at that level of like very, very high stress for years and years and years. And so for them inside looking out, they think this is temporary. But people on the outside looking into their life, they go, well, they've been like this for years. This is normal for them. And so we always want to be gracious. Always want to be gracious to these folks and try to be understanding. And then you've got your D group. D group's on the outside here. D group is the folks at church that you're like, do they go here? You're not like the greeter might introduce themselves and they think, buddy, I've been coming here for years, intermittently. You know who the D group is friends with? You know who can get the D group to come to church?
Nobody.
It's not the A group and it's not the B group. More often than not, the people who have connected the D group to the church in the first place is the C group. You know who has the most connections outside the church?
The D group.
D group. D group. See, B group, their friends are in the A group and they're in the C group. C group, they got friends in the B group and some of their friends are in the D group. And they might have a few others out there somewhere else. D group, most of their friends are going to be C group or even farther afield. So the question is, how do we get people to move from one group into the other? How do you move people in through these relationships? What do you think?
Over here, there's a saying, there are people that wish things to happen. There are people that watch things happen. And there are people that make things happen. So I think from the categories you've mentioned, the A group basically would fall in the category of people that make things happen. Well, that does not invalidate the rest of the group because they all have their place and their function as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have control of things, and they're making things happen. Here's the thing: if you're an A group person, the best thing that you can do for your church is break off part of your job and give it to somebody else. Give it to a B group person and let them do it the way they want to do it. It will not be the way you want to do it. You're going to see them make the same mistakes that you made. You're going to want to go, don't worry. Church didn't burn down when you made mistakes. It probably ain't going to burn down when they make mistakes either. You can always, somebody told me this recently, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about. Criticism or advice that is not asked for is always criticism, or at least it's always perceived as criticism. And so, I try with my college students not to give them advice on what to do, just to, I'll ask questions. I'll, well, mostly I just ask questions and I take a step back, see what happens. It's interesting. It's always pretty fun. But if you can break off part of your job, give that piece to somebody else and put them in charge of it, empower them to do something with it. It's really cool what'll happen. Quick story in my own ministry. One of the things that we try to do is we try to have people at church adopt some of our college students. And so we have an adopt a student, adopt a parent program, and we get both parties to sign up for it voluntarily. Well, one of the guys at church for years, he's just every year he wants to sign up. He wants to be one of the adopted parent, and he tells me how much he loves the adopted parent program, how much it changed his life. And I don't know if I'd be in the church if it wasn't for Miss Tammy, and if it wasn't for this person, it wasn't for that person, and he just goes on and on and on about it. You know what I really hate doing? I hate reading through these forms and trying to go, okay, this person, do I pair them with this person or that person? And I got to get, where's that other form? Where did that other form go? Where's my other stack? I got to find another stack of papers. And I mean, I love the end result. I hate the process. And so I'm talking to him one day and he says, yeah, I'm actually over mentorship at this large local he works for Tennessee Valley Authority. He works for TVA. He's in charge of mentorship at TVA. And I'm like, really? And he's telling me, oh, yeah, I put together this thing where it matches mentors up with mentees. And da-da-da. And I just asked, I'm like, brother, will you help me? And he's like, well, what do you need? Anything for the student center. And I'm like, I need you to take over Adopt a Student. Oh, no, that's yours. That's yours. I'm like, no, I'll still be like in charge of it. I just need you to be the person that makes it happen this year. And he's like, well, what do you want me to do? And I was like, whatever you think would work, whatever you think is going to benefit the students. You've been through the program and you've been on both sides of it. You're in charge of the mentorship stuff. I trust you. You have my complete trust. Go with God, my brother. And he kept wanting to put it back in my lap, and I kept on just gently pushing it back to him. And then he started saying, well, what if we do this? And what if I do this? I can use the program that I used at work to make the forms. I don't have to deal with paper forms this year. Do you know how happy that makes me? It is all done through Google Sheets, and he has an algorithm written out that will auto match and populate a list of every student's 3 best matches. And so then I can move those pieces, or I don't have to do any of the parts of the job that I hate anymore. And he's made it to where I can just copy and paste the same thing next year and do it all over again. He has made the job easier for him. He has made the job easier for me. Never in a million years would have I thought to do that. Then the other part of it is I've asked him and one of the other young professionals at church, can you help me round up some parents? I need some more parents to sign up. We don't have enough parents. Never have there been two better evangelists for this cause because they can tell you both sides of it, what it means. I mean, they've got a zeal for it like none other. So they are the guys in the B group that are now pulling in people from the C group. As he becomes more and more in charge of more things within his area, he's already building his connections of people that he can rely upon. That's going to pull in those B group people. When the D group people see what's happening to their C group people, it makes them curious. And oftentimes the C group people start inviting them more and more. We had a lady at church who had, oh, I think, what was it? She had one of her sons move back to town. And it just kept on, kept on, kept on. Anytime they'd talk on the phone, they'd talk every day, inviting him to church, inviting him to church, inviting him to church. Finally, he came. And so then she called the other brother who's been living in town all along and said, your brother came to church with me. I love this woman. She has filled up two pews full of full of family members, just all of her kids and her grandkids and everybody else. And I mean, she is a bringer, buddy. You can look in our church building, and we've got an old building. It's pretty big, and we're trying to fill it back up again. But man, around her, full, full. And so this model of like A, B, C, D, you can do it with your youth group. You can sit down with your elders and do it with the whole congregation. I do it with my college group every year. And you always have to remind your A group over and over and over and over again. Give part of your job to somebody else. Ask for help. The more you can give to these other people, you are training them on the job. And so, especially this is vital for my ministry because all of my leaders will be gone in 2 years. If they don't train people up, I got nobody, and I'm going to be drowning. And so it's a vital part of any church. I just have to do it, at a very, very high tempo. Your congregation at a youth ministry, you've got sometimes 4 to 7 years with kids. And so you're having to kind of work in that way. Okay. So let's take, we're at about 8 o'clock here. Oof. Been going for about an hour and a half. Let's take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll meet back and we'll talk about the last little bit of this, and then we'll talk about the philosophy and theology paper that's due in week 7. Sound good?
It sounds good.
All right. Okay, we all back?
Yep.
Okay. So, uh, my next, I guess, big question is what is ministry?
Sharing the news, the good news.
Okay. Sharing the news is definitely part of what it is to minister. Okay. What else? It's good.
Probably helping other people gain a better understanding of God and His work and their mission in that work.
Okay. Yeah. Helping other people like understand, you know, understand Christ and their place in his in I guess the whole scheme of redemption. What is our place in the church? Okay. Yeah. Good. What else?
I would say ministry is like a collective purpose.
Okay.
'Cause when I think of ministry, I mean, I know as individuals we can minister, but ministry, I think of like a group of people, common purpose. So that's why I'd say that one.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Also,
Common purpose.
I would say serving in your church and serving your community, serving
Sir.
God,
Okay. Yeah.
and things like
I,
that.
I love that the word service is a big part of it. A very, very big part of it. Absolutely.
I
Anyone
would
else?
say ministry is the whole duty involving bringing people into the kingdom of God and sustaining them in their journey to heaven.
Hmm. Absolutely. So when we're reading our New Testament, um, oftentimes we'll come across the word ministry. The verb form that is in Greek. It's uh, uh, diakonia. The noun form, diakonos, is like the person who ministers, the minister. So diakonia, it means quite literally. You can use it in several, like a lot of our words. You can use it in kind of several different ways. So one definition is service rendered in an intermediary capacity, mediation or assignment. And so you're acting on behalf of somebody. And so in the case of a minister, when we're doing ministry, we're acting on behalf of God, on behalf of Jesus. We're acting on behalf of the kingdom. It can also mean to perform a service, and this means like could be something like preparing a meal. You're doing service for somebody. It can also mean to render assistance, aid, support, and we can also think of ministry in this way as an administrative function. When I was doing mission work overseas in China, there was uh, we were kind of coached in advance, like don't say that you're with like ministry or you're a minister because they're going to think that you work for the government. Because many other countries when they think of the word ministry, they're thinking Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of whatever. We use department in the States, but the idea of an administrative function. And if you're looking at like what does a minister do? Well, do we do administrative functions? Yeah, administrative details is way more part of my job than I don't like for it to be. I joke that they don't have to pay me to teach class. They don't have to pay me to teach devotionals. They don't have to pay me to counsel college students. You've got to pay me to answer emails, though. You got to pay me to do paperwork. you know, I don't. That's part of my job. Um, I do it because I'm paid to do it. But then, do we also render assistance, render aid, render support? Yeah, absolutely. Do we perform a service? Man, I hope so. If we're not serving, we're missing it. I mean, it's been said before, and it needs to be said often. We are never more like Jesus than when we serve. Service is a major, major part of ministry, and if we're not doing that, we are missing a vital component of what it is to show people who Jesus is. And we're absolutely acting on an intermediary way. Part of that is the teaching. Part of that is is, the care and the instruction and the encouragement and all of those things. But so much about ministry, it is about serving. It is about administering and overseeing, and always it is about being that intermediary between the kingdom of God and the image bearers of God. Calling them back to Him. So, could somebody read for me? Well, before we move on, any thoughts on what it means to be involved, or not involved? What it means to minister? Thoughts, insights, questions. No. Okay. Somebody could read for me Ephesians 4, 11 through 16.
And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint which with it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love.
All right. Thank you, David. Yeah, he says that God gives the church all these different people, apostles. It's little a apostle. Apostle means like the sent out ones. Apo is the Greek for to be out, and then stello is to be sent. So sent out. The prophets, these people who speak. They're the speakers of God. They're God's mouthpiece. The evangelists. This is from evangelion. This is the you could say the good newsers. They're the people that are coming out there. They're saying, "I got good news. Jesus Christ, loves you and died for you, and He wants to, reunite you with the God that made you." The shepherds and the teachers and the people within the church, the people that are doing the overseeing, the people that are administering the classes, and all of these are to equip the saints for the work of ministry. That word "for" might be one of the most important words in that whole phrase, because sometimes we get it backwards. We think that He gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers, and He equips them to minister. And no. We're not there. Like, we're there to equip the saints, not spend all of our time ministering to the saints. We spend if we spend all of our time ministering to the saints, then it's no wonder. It's no wonder if our church isn't growing. I'm not saying that our saints don't have needs. What I am saying is that the church needs to learn how, one, how to share those needs. I think a lot of times, at least in people that I've known and even myself, I'm okay with other people needing help. I'm not okay with asking for it. And we need to get over ourselves, that we are created in the image of God. We are not God. We are not the creator, the producer, the source of all good. We're a conduit for it. But we have limitations, and sometimes we need help, and it's a blessing to other people to ask them for help. Benjamin Franklin said that he realized that people were more positively disposed to him and regarded him as a closer friend when he asked them for help than when he gave help to them. If you can ask somebody for help, you are showing them that you respect them, that you see something in them that is worthy of that they've got something good to offer. And so to ask people for that help, and sometimes they're going to want to give it back to you. But you just kind of keep encouraging them, keep helping them to see the good that they can do. And the more you can then kind of turn them loose on doing good with other people within the church and then outside the church, that's going to, as Paul said, that's going to build up the body of Christ. I love this whole passage here, and especially in the context of thinking about it for youth ministry, because it says, so that we may no longer be children. It talks about that we grow up into the full stature, or the full fullness of the mature manhood. I think some versions will say adulthood would also be appropriate. That we are called to grow up into the full adulthood, to the measure of the stature and fullness of Christ, so that we no longer, we're no longer children. When we're thinking of like adolescence, that early teenage, up to adolescence can stretch into for girls like early 20s, guys mid 20s. That's not me. Shaming the boys, but biologically speaking, the brain in young women is done developing by about age 21, 22. For men, it's about age 25. Takes us a few more years to finish cooking. And so that period of transition, there's still a lot going on there. And so we continue to minister to those people in that process. And so that's when we're thinking, it was brought up, I believe, Paul, you were the one who mentioned it, never really thinking about the age of the apostles. I had a meeting with my students this evening before, toward the end of the workday. And, my student leaders, I've got 4 girls and 4 guys, and they work, at various capacities within our ministry to, help with the day-to-day functions and to do outreach with students and all these kinds of things. And I was, I could tell, all the stuff that I was talking to them about, you could just see them like, I'm physically like putting this weight on them, and they're beginning to sink lower in their folding chairs. And I just stopped and I go, do you guys know how the apostles were? And they like, what? And I said, when you picture the apostles, how old are they? And they're kind of like, I don't know. And they're, and I want to go, like, do you think they're old like me? I said, probably the reason why Peter is the only one we ever hear about having a wife is he's probably the only one that's old enough to have one. Their eyes got real big. And I explained kind of what Kirk says about John and how old he would have been. And that Peter's probably the oldest and John's probably the youngest. That means ballpark, you've got 15 to 25. And I think 25 might be a bit old for Peter, honestly. And I said, what did God do with them? What's God going to do with you? And, it's one of the moments in ministry where like, that was the right thing to say, because you could see the look on their face, like, yeah, they went from feeling like they've got this big heavy weight to now they've got this thing pulling them forward. And so it's like, that was exciting to get to see in them as they're moving into that period of mature adulthood, that it's not about like, I don't have anything to offer, but no, I'm the age group that Jesus picked to do ministry. I've got work to do. And so it was good kind of finishing the day on a high note like that. But all this that the different groups that God provides the church, that we're supposed to grow up into the stature of Christ, that we're not being tossed back and forth. I mean, if you've worked with young people for any amount of time, you can see how they get tossed around, day in, day out. One week they're best friends with somebody, and the next week they can't stand them. One week, they're all, cowboy boots and country music, and the next week they're into, they got a skateboard and Vans on, and then the next week it's something else. And it's like they're constantly trying on hats, trying to figure out what their personality is. sometimes quite literally trying on hats. And I've had to tell some of the boys, a hat is not a personality. Something that somebody should have told me when I was younger. Um, and so anyway, so all this, it's to equip the church to build it up in love. Dalen, you mentioned the one-eared Mickey Mouse model, and Kirk talks about being connected. Um, I know Kirk. I love Kirk. He's a great guy. I got one beef with this chapter, though. I got one issue. Don't say connected. The Mickey Mouse ear is connected. It's attached. It's on there. What we want it to be is integrated. We want it to be part of the whole. And so, think of it as two overlapping circles. We want it built in to that whole picture. And so, how do we move from a youth ministry model that is traditionally it's connected to the church, but is not integrated? Like quite literally, one of the ministries that I worked in, the youth group did not even meet inside the church building. We had one of those big Lowe's sheds that they had put outside. They had kitted it out really nice, drywall and carpet floors and air conditioning and TVs and all that. That's where my office was too. But we were literally just connected to the church building by a fence. Students had to hope that when they were coming out to Bible class on Wednesday evening that I didn't have my office door locked or they're going to stay in the rain. We want our young people to be integrated into the church. We eventually got them moved inside and we kicked the young professionals out in the rain. But our young people, we want them to be integrated. So if we're trying to do youth ministry, family ministry, involvement ministry, the thing is, I don't believe you can do youth ministry correctly if you aren't doing family involvement. You have to have family involvement if you're going to do it right. And so then the question is, and I think pretty much everybody touched on this in their comments, how do we handle the spiritual development of the youth? How do we, if we have this trend where the parents just want to hand them over to the youth minister, how do we reverse that trend? How do we move away from the one-eared Mickey Mouse model where the family unit is central to the development of our young people and they're integrated into the larger work of the church? How do we move away from shallow teaching and do teaching that is both is relevant and it's deep, but they get it. It resonates with them. How do you how can the church and the family partner to become a better team? I know, I think it was Blaine, we were talking last week, sometimes youth ministers can have an adversarial relationship with youth ministers and vice versa. And I forget which of my professors said this, and they said, oftentimes, we forget what the other one's job is. Youth ministers are youth ministers, parents are parents. I think, any parent's going to get pretty grumpy when you start telling the parent how to parent their child, but you can't ask them to help you minister to them. Asking for help in that way, it's not you should, it's can you? And if the answer is no, then we want to respond with more questions. We want to understand where that no is coming from. And sometimes that no is coming from a place of I don't feel like I have enough time, or I don't feel like I have enough knowledge, or I don't feel like I have enough whatever. But what it boils down to is I don't feel like I'm enough. And so that's the equipping stage. That's the giving them simple models of how to do a Bible study, how to do a family devotional. Our church this past year, cards on the table, y'all. I'm gonna be glad when this is over. But I think it's a great thing we did. We put together a book that is 52 lessons long over every book of the Bible. So some of the books, there's 66 books in the Bible, 52 weeks in the year. So you got to double up on some of those, like your First and Second Chronicles, your First and Second Kings, things like that. But it has a small group study. It has an individual study. It has a family study. It has kind of like a summary page that kind of ties all of these lessons together. I feel like it's got one more thing I'm blanking on. I always do the small group and the individual studies. I help write those. But those family studies, I believe it's our church secretary, a lady named Robin. She has done most of those, and just some of the stuff that she's put in there is just so cute and so thoughtful, and would be so good for kids of various ages. Some weeks it might be good for youngers, and some might be good for older. But if you've got kids of whatever age, you're gonna find stuff that you can use and adapt in a curriculum like that. So sometimes it means finding a curriculum that benefits these families. Back when it was COVID, one of the ways that I would minister to the church is I sat down one day and I came up with a weekly plan, a reading schedule, discussion questions, prayer prompts, all kinds of stuff. And we had a messaging service our church was using at the time. And I did, one of those per week, give you a weekly schedule. And I set it up to every week. It would go into their inbox. It would drop in on, I believe, Sunday morning. Right about the time we were doing our online worship, they'd get a little ping on their email, and it would have, all right, this week read these passages, discuss these things with your kids. I'd love to hear back from you the kinds of things that you're talking about. Some of the families, I think I went straight to spam and I never got out. But some of those families, I know that they were keeping up with it, because there would be weeks when I had not clicked a button and it didn't go out, and they'd text me Monday morning, "Where's my email?" And so you don't always know what the fruit of your effort is going to be, but the fruit of not trying is nothing. You gotta put the effort in and trust God. Plant, water, and He's going to give the increase. So, trying to do youth and family involvement. We're not going to do youth ministries, get everybody involved. So, what are the benefits of integrating the youth into the larger congregation? What good does that do?
I'd say it makes a smoother transition for when they, if they're still in the congregation or if they go to another congregation, like it just smoother transition. It's not like,
Oh yeah,
I guess you say, a culture shock.
yeah. You want to give them an entrance ramp, onto that, into that adult class or college class or whatever it's going to be for them. You don't want them having to do like a hard right turn and gun it. Because that's, it's tough. It's tough making those transitions. Absolutely. What else?
I think it integrates them in with a different age group and introduces them better.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there is I wish that, if Kirk had done anything, and I think there's probably another chapter on this, the value of intergenerational relationships is enormous. One of the points in the chapters was like,
Can y'all hear me? I think it's may have swapped over to my laptop headphone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Oh,
you
okay.
good?
Okay, good deal.
Yes.
My headphone died. The it won't well, that's all it takes to derail that train of thought, I guess. Marvin, remind me again what you had just said. See if it'll shake that thought loose that I had, because you made a good point.
It integrates them in and introduces them to the next group better.
Yeah, it integrates them. Thank you. Yeah. So intergenerational relationships. There is so much research on the value of intergenerational relationships within spiritual communities. Your intermediate, those middle grade, like eighth, ninth, 10th graders, maybe even up through all the way up through the end of high school. They they need those second families because they still need a mom and dad, but sometimes they don't feel like they can talk to mom and dad. If I talk to my mom and dad, I'm gonna get grounded, I'm gonna get in trouble, I'm gonna get yelled at, I'm gonna get na 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 na. And so either think about the kids in around your life, or think about when you were a kid, when you were in that, like, seventh, eighth, ninth, all the way through high school. How much time did you spend over at your friend's house? Or you have friends coming over and hanging out at your house, either after school or on the weekends or whatever. Um, how much time did you spend around other people's families? I know some kids, it's I had a couple of friends, all they wanted to do was get away from their house. You know, some of them came from good households and just wanted to get away for whatever reason. Some of them came from some really rough backgrounds and wanted to get away for other reasons. But they, when they would come over, my mom, she wanted to, didn't matter what their name was. She'd call them son if they were in the house. Um, which used to burn me up when we were playing soccer. She'd be yelling, "Go, son!" And I'm on the sidelines. I'm like, "Come on, mom." Um, so um, having those other relationships. I know my sister, there was a lady at church. She was real good friends with her daughter. And there were things that she could talk to, her friend's mother, that she was terrified to talk to my mom and dad about. And so having those intergenerational relationships, having those second families, having that connection is huge, huge, huge. A really good way that you can do this is bringing parents on youth trips. I I really, this is the thing I love to do. Bring parents on the youth trip, but not those kids' parents. If you can get parents that their kids are out of the youth group or they're not in the youth group yet, you can get them to come on the trip. Boy, oh boy, that's a good time, because the parents that have kids that have already been through this age, they look at this nonsense and they roll their eyes and they're like, "Oh, I remember when my kid did that." And then the parents with younger kids, they're looking at what these kids are doing and they're going, "Oh, so this is what the youth group does. Now I know what the youth group does before my kid's actually in there," so they can set expectations for their kids. It does a great thing. And then the other benefit is now these kids in the youth group are getting to make friends with parents outside of that age group, outside of their circle, but none of them feel like their mom and dad is looking over their shoulder, because sometimes when mom and dad is there, the side that kid feels like they can show changes. Um, and so, we want kids to be able to feel comfortable and in their own skins. We don't want to keep mom and dad at a distance, so we have to find other places to fit them in. And again, I'm not against having mom and dad come on the retreat. I'm all for that. Um, Sometimes the parents are glad to not go on the retreat, but they know they're yours this weekend. I'm going on a date. They're getting out of there. Um, but getting those parents involved in other ways, either hosting devotionals in the home, providing food, maybe getting, somebody to, speak at a devotional, or that could be older brother, that could be uncle, that could be, you know, I always love doing a guys girls split and letting the moms talk to the girls and the dads talk to the guys, because you could handle totally different topics in those environments. Um, you know, I tell this to my guys in my youth ministry or my college ministry probably a handful of times every semester. They'll be grousing about some part of the work that they have to do, and I'll lean in and say, my secret to success? Competent women. And I mean, it's true. It's true. Not that I haven't been, tremendously invested in by so many good men, and huge beneficiary of so many good men who have poured into me. But there's so many women out there that they're doing stuff that I couldn't even do. They're able to handle stuff that in a way that it's just far exceeds. I had I'll tell you one quick story. When I was doing campus ministry in Alabama, uh, every week I was just trying to struggle. I was struggling with, like, what are we going to feed this group this week? Our church didn't have it. Our church building didn't have a kitchen. And so we didn't have a way to cook because we were meeting in what was an old insurance building, you know. And so we just didn't have a way to prepare any food. And it's I mean, it's like, okay, pizza every week until I have a heart attack and die. And uh, one of the moms of one of her youngest daughter had gone off to college elsewhere, and her oldest daughter had graduated. And she came in one night and we were having pizza again, and she goes, "What are you feeding these kids?" I said, "Domino's." And she was like, "Why?" And I was like, "Because we don't have a Little Caesars." Um, and and she goes, "No, no, no, honey, let us ladies cook for y'all." And I was like, "Yeah, I know I need to do that." And da, 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 da. And she goes, "Just let me handle it." And I'm like, "Well, you know, I really appreciate you covering next week. That's huge." And she's like, "No, let me cover it." I didn't have to plan one more meal the rest of my time I was down there. I gave her my schedule. She would line up the food. It was there every single time. And the one instance where it wasn't, um, we called her and we said, "Hey, who's set to do food this week?" And she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot. It was, so and so, but they had to take their mother-in-law to the hospital or whatever. Um, Go ahead, do the devotional. The pizza will be there before you finish." And it was. We had to rearrange our schedule just slightly, but it worked wonderfully. And so integrating these people into the larger um, the group into the larger, bringing the parents in, but also the other side of it is how do you get the young people out front? Do you have kids that can lead a prayer in class? Can they read scripture in class? They can lead a prayer in worship. They can read, in front of the congregation. They can lead a song. I love doing singing nights. Our congregation does a singing night every second Wednesday of the month, and my son will get up there and he will lead about 30% of the first piece of Hallelujah Praise Jehovah every time. You know, he knows a few lines of it, and he'll get up there and he'll lead it, and he loves it. And then he'll just stand there and smile while everybody sings, and then he'll go sit down. And we've got some other boys in our college group. We've had some others in the youth group that have gotten up and led before. And sometimes it'll be guys that have never gotten up and led a song ever before in their life. And for whatever reason, they get up there and they do it. And so giving them places in the ministry, whether it's up front in the worship, whether that's opportunity to help you co-teach in class. I did a leadership camp for our youth, and I mean it was what was it, 10 a.m. to I think 4 p.m. It was Monday through Thursday in the summertime. Parent would drop them off, or I would go get them. That's the reason why I'd have to have it at 10. So I had to go. I had to run, make my rounds in the church van. I'd bring them back to the church building. We'd eat donuts. We'd study the Bible. I would teach them how to lay out a devotional. I would teach them how to lead singing. I would teach them how to plan for a Bible class. How to, what's a good question? What's not a very good question? What do you do when people don't answer? What do you know, what do you do? How do you do this and how do you do that? And by the end of it, the goal was for each of them to do a devotional, to lead a song, to teach a Bible class. And they had the option that if they wanted to teach a Bible class, they would lead the class, but I would co-teach with them. I would be there as a life preserver. And we'd come up with some kind of sign that they could throw to me for something. Um, and I would, I could chime in for them. And uh, one of our young men, I've since moved since then, but he texted me the other day and he said, "I really appreciate that leadership camp you did a few years ago. I've decided that I'm going to go. I'm going to be a preacher. I really enjoyed that week, and ever since then, I've wanted to do more." And so that's how we make ministers, y'all. Um, treat them like they have that ability now, and as they find opportunities to get as they get older, it's going to light a fire in some of them. Some of them it'll scare them, it'll make them nervous, but you just work with them. Um, and I always find that you feed them well in the process. Um, So that's a big one. Any other ideas that you guys have for how do we integrate youth into the larger congregation? What are some practical ways that we can do that?
Well, one way that I've seen is like Wednesday nights is typically, or after Wednesday night worship, we'll basically just taking out the trash is one easy way that I've seen.
Yes,
Gotta spread the load, gotta spread the love. So that's been one way to get folks or to get the youth in our congregation involved.
absolutely. Yeah, getting them into small acts of service is huge. Our college ministry, we had to get rid of our dishwasher because the city made us do it. I don't know, something to do with environmental controls. We have to wash dishes by hand now, and that's great. And having our students go back, hey, Devo, we need two people to come back here and wash a dish. I need somebody to help me wipe down tables. And used to we would do a sign up list, or we would just like yell and see who would show up. And what I'm having my leaders do now is I want you to go and I just want you to ask, hey, will you give me a hand just a couple minutes? I just need a little bit of help. And a lot of times at the very least they'll do the minimum and they'll wipe the tables or they'll clean the dishes and they'll go do something else. But a lot of times they'll start doing other stuff too. And for me to be able to see somebody do that, that's how I know who my next year's leaders are going to be. If you're gonna take that extra step, I know like, okay, that's somebody I need to be watching for. And so, giving them a little bit of work to do. I love that. That's great. What else?
I think asking for help and actually letting them take the initiative and become the leader of that project,
Hmm.
and try to delegate to some of their friends and stuff and bringing them in because we can reach out, but especially at my age, I'm quite a bit older than the rest of the guys, but when I reach out, it's an old man reaching out. But then when one of those youth reach out, like my grandson, when he reaches out to his peers, they're more receptive to him than they are to me as far as coming in and being more of a part. But I think trust is the biggest thing. You've got to be able to trust those children and those young adults to be able to do what you want them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, developing that trust and it's kind of giving them if you can give them jobs, again, I told you my son's 4. We give him chores around the house that I could do so much faster and I could do it cleaner and I could do it whatever. I'd much rather him make a mess of it and do the job and I have to clean up behind him than him grow up in a house where I'm doing everything for him or his mom is doing everything for him. And so he helps feed the dogs and he puts this morning he had eaten his breakfast and he'd gotten down, he was playing. I was like, buddy, you forgot something. And he goes, what? And I said, your plate. And he goes, I ate my food. And I said, and you left it on the table. And he goes, oh, I forgot. Runs back over, gets the plate, puts it in the sink. That's all he had to do. Um, and so, it's the same sort of thing with the youth group. If we can, give them jobs to in the church building, outside the church building. One of the men at church in Alabama, very good friend of mine named Robert. He would, man, gold star at this, finding people and getting them plugged in, giving them a job to do. Everything from, calling up a young man and going, hey, little old lady had a tree blow down in her yard. I can run the chainsaw, but my back can't carry all these logs, but I can cut them as big or as small as you want them. Can I use you and a couple of your friends? And the truth is, he could move those logs no problem. He could cut them as small as he needed to move them. But getting those boys out there and getting them moving the logs, that's he's serving that little old lady and he's serving those boys too, in that by bringing them into that. And so if you've got men who are at your congregation that are over service projects, you know, if it's a small project that doesn't need a whole big old group, what a blessing to these young men to bring them into that work and teach them a practical skill. Teach them how to do a little bit of plumbing, teach them how to do a little bit of electrical, teach them how to, if mama's not watching, teach them how to run a chainsaw. Kidding, kind of.
Kind
And,
of.
get them involved in that work in some way. And so, if we're doing these things, opportunities are going to breed opportunities. As we integrate these families into the youth program, the youth into the larger congregation, it's going to transform the culture of the congregation. And I tell you, there's nothing more encouraging than to see young people leading and serving in really cool ways. One of my favorite things that we did down in Alabama is I tasked our college group with planning a lot of the church social events. And I can legitimately say some of the best events that I went to with that congregation were ones that the college students came up with because they would do all the things that you would expect. We need to have people sign up for food and we need to, play some games. But then it never failed that they would always have some kind of weird idea that I think that is absolutely bonkers. We're not doing that. That's not going to work. And it's like, no, we want to do a senior citizen Halloween costume contest. The old people never dress up. We want to give them a really good prize. And we had some of our old senior saints dress up in Halloween costumes and, parade around like a bumblebee or whatever. And, got a, I don't know, Amazon gift card and, whatever for the trouble. Um, and, it's a fun thing to see them serving, the congregation that way. Um, last, well, I'll save this one for another day. Let's talk about the paper. Um, so the tonight I'm assigning you the theology and philosophy of youth ministry paper. That should be in the documents that I sent you last week. This is going to be something, it's just homework. You've got until week 7 to do it. Don't I want to encourage you, don't put it off till then. This is something that you will need to do some study on. I'm looking for scripture. I'm looking for some good, well thought out philosophy. The reason why I call it a theology and philosophy paper is the theology, that's the God part. That's what does scripture say about youth involvement in family ministry? The philosophy part is philosophy means love of wisdom. And so this is the wisdom side. It's what does the research say? What does wise counsel and experience say? Not just your own experience, but the experience of others. Talk to other people in ministry. Get their thoughts, get their insights. Um, and as Paul says, like how can you test the spirits on this? How can you test them and see, is it sound research? Is it sound guidance? Is it sound wisdom? How does that stuff line up uh, you know, with scripture? If somebody gives you a bogus piece of advice, test it against God's word. See if well, maybe I'm wrong about this, or oof, you know, want to stay away from that. That doesn't line up with God's word. Line these things up and come up with what you like. How would you structure and run a ministry based on the principles that you derive from this theology and this philosophy? How and make it specific to you. Um, Paul, you're in Africa. I look forward to reading a paper that is from your perspective. Dalen, Blaine, JD, Nislane, y'all are all working in different capacities, serving the church in different capacities. I and then Marvin, sorry, Marvin, I didn't mean to overlook you. I didn't see you in my list here. Um, the we're all serving in different capacities, most of us across the American Southeast, but all in very different ways. If you were to run a youth ministry in your current congregation, what's that look like? You know, what are you using? What are you gonna, tweak? What would you do in that situation if it's put in your lap? What do you do? And this is going to be something that I think will be probably one of the better assignments for you all for this class. That's why I'm giving you, half the semester to work on it. I want you all to really kind of give real thought to what you want to do with this, and I look forward to seeing what you write. Also, as a note, if you get it done early and you send it to me, I can do like a preliminary grade on it, send it back to you, and you can see the kind of stuff that oh, I didn't think he was going to be picky about the grammar or he's going to be picky about the readability or whatever. I'm a very picky person when it comes to what I'm reading. Um, I I don't mean to be, but I'll read stuff and I'll get my red pen out. Um, and so I try not to be harsh in the grading, but I do try to take a fine comb to the things and make sure that we're communicating clearly. A big part of our work as people who are wanting to minister the saints is to communicate. And if we can't communicate well through writing, when we have the ability to stop and to read over it and to reword and to refine and to edit, then how are we going to do when we're just speaking off the cuff? You know, and I know the way we speak and the way we write are different, but we need to be able to swim in both waters effectively in order to communicate the gospel. Um, because here's the thing: one of these days, every one of us is going to be in the ground. But the things that we write, our loved ones will still have those, and they'll still be able to hear our voice from the things that we leave behind. So we want to leave them behind something good. So I'm a huge believer in the value of writing. Helps clarify the way that we think and helps clarify the way that we communicate. Any questions about the theology and philosophy of ministry paper? Yeah, as I said, that's week 7, and it's 500 to 600 words is what I'm looking for. So it's not a huge paper. I really want you to pack in as much information in as few words as possible. Be concise. Best advice that was ever given to me as a person who writes: omit needless words. If you can get rid of the word, dump it. If you can take a phrase and turn it into one word, change it. If you've made this point and you're making it again, get it out of there. Make it once and move on. Give me as much information as you can in 500 to 600 words, because this is something that I need to work on as a person who speaks out loud. Concision is important. Don't if we ramble on too much in our writing or in our speaking, we lose people. And so learning to be concise is, perhaps one of the most important communication skills for people who serve in the church in any capacity, teachers, preachers, whatever. So pack as much as you can into that 500 to 600 words. I'm keeping the paper short, but that doesn't mean I don't expect effort. To quote one of my professors, the standard for the paper is impress me. Things that impress me are good writing and good research. Um, so I've seen some good stuff over the past week, but I know you guys are gonna do good things. I believe in you, and I've enjoyed this class today. But we are right at about our last 5 minutes. Also, want to let you know there is a reading assignment for next week, just like we had this past week. This last week we did 1 and 2. This week is chapters 5 and 7. So chapters 5 and 7 for next week. Be sure to get those reading reviews in. And next week we're going to be talking about connection to God and finding a congregation. If we're wanting to serve in ministry, like if we're in a congregation but we want to go into it full time. How do we do that? And then the very important thing of as a minister, how do I get close and stay close to God? Because you got to keep that personal relationship going. And I'm very excited. I'm going to get to introduce everyone to the Renova Church of Christ, fictional Church of Christ that I've cooked up that has so many problems. And we're going to get to work through those together. Any questions before we close? If not, thank you all. I've enjoyed this class, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. God bless you. Go with God.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Yep, see y'all.
God bless you.
Good night. Thank you.